We'll now head to our first interview of the conference. Now, Malcolm Brown, MBE, has evolved from athlete to volunteer coach to employed coach to coach mentor over a period of 50 years. Simultaneously, he has worked full-time in schools, universities, and for British athletics and British triathlon. His specialism is endurance, but informed by speed, skill, and strength. Athletes Malcolm has coached have won 6 Olympic medals and numerous global titles. He has co-founded the Leeds Triathlon Centre in the UK, initiated the Global Coaches House, and facilitated the UK Athletics Talent Hub and National Race Walk Centre in Leeds. Interviewing Malcolm is Professor Sergio Lara-Bercial. Hi, Sergio. Hi, Malcolm.
Hi, Malcolm. How are you?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. I'm very good.
Listen, thank you very much, as always, for answering the call of iCoachKids. And as always, a great pleasure to chat to you. I'm very fortunate that happens quite often. So, listen, and I think actually on the back of Juanita's presentation and the systems he described in Australia, I think this is the perfect interview really to go after that presentation, because we're going to be discussing a lot of that. I mean, the main thrust of these interviews around the transition from a promising junior athlete to an Olympic champion. And I know you've coached a large number of athletes over the years, but perhaps the two most famous are these two Yorkshire brothers, Johnny and Ali Brownlee, who have been Olympic champions and world champions multiple times. And we're going to focus on them, if that's okay with you. So Malcolm, please tell me when you first came across Ali and Johnny, and how old were they and what were they like?
I took a new job moved to Leeds as director of sport at the university, and I partly chose the job because I'm a passionate coach, and it had an athletics track and the facilities that I knew I'd be spending my spare time after work, weekends at. And there wasn't much going on. I mooched out there and nothing was happening, and there were not many students. And then these two little boys came running across the infield of the athletics track, followed by the guardian. It was their father. And the father said to me, would I be able to get them to run faster? This taller one is Alistair, age 15, but the small one is a soccer player. He's not interested in running or triathlon, or just ignore him, he said. And anyhow, that was Alistair and Johnny, age 15 and 14, I think, at that stage.
And at that point, was there any indication that they could be what they became? Was it clear from day one, or what did you think at the time?
No, it wasn't. Looking back now, I could see that I missed some signs that if I'd been a better coach and more sensitive, I may have picked up. But if we're talking about the traditional talent ID markers, you know, were they the fastest in the country? Were their running times, their swim times, particularly? They weren't. They were in the national squad at that age, a regional squad, sorry, at that age, and then to move to the national. But they weren't the best in those squads. They weren't the best in Britain at that stage in terms of their performances or their times. But as I say, if I look back on it now, if I could have been able to measure the way we can measure how fast somebody can run around a track, their love of the outdoors, their love of training, their work ethic, their resilience, their ability to recover from one session to another, at the age of 15 and 14, I would have had a very different profile of those lads. And it may be that would have shown that they had what it took.
So beyond the traditional markers or how fast, how strong, for you, that the key differentiator between them and others over time were that love of training and love of working hard? Was that what really set them apart?
Yeah, and a genuine love of it, not for extrinsic winning of medals or getting kit or whatever 15-year-olds, it was a real enjoyment of pitting themselves against the environment and against others, and critically, of course, against each other.
And that's a really important point, right? Because I mean, how did they, or how did you manage that kind of fraternal relationship? Was it always positive, or?
It didn't always appear positive, but it was positive. When I say it didn't always appear positive, because they were there are 3 Brownleys, by the way. There's a third brother who thinks that running around the streets in Lycra is something that no human being should be allowed to do. He has no desire whatsoever. He's a rugby player. But the competitive element between the 2 of them at times boiled over, but it was also a key characteristic that they both had. Alistair wanted to keep Johnny, the younger, in his place, and Johnny wanted to knock Alistair off his perch every day in training, not just in the races. And that was my challenge, was to identify which days that they had permission, as it were, to go for it, and which days they would just cooperate and go for an easy ride, easy run, or easy swim.
So that's interesting that I think Juanita mentioned before, or that you have to coach the athlete in front of you, and you have these 2. Were all those decisions made beforehand, or did you have to be quite flexible and just read the atmosphere in the session and then at times just change tack and go for something else, or how was that?
Yeah, well, both of those really, Sergio. I mean, clearly, I although they were 15 and 40 when they came to me, I was 58. I'd had a lot of coaching. I've been coaching since I was 30 years of age. And I'd coached at the Olympics. I was in the Sydney Olympic stadium that we saw earlier as a track and field coach. And I knew what it took to be a world-class athlete. And so I knew what we were aiming for. I knew what it looked like. I knew what they had to acquire. And I was able to shape the week, if you like, which stretched them, but not too much. But within that, I would always look at them very carefully when they turned up at the training venue and try to judge, because they would never say they were tired. They would never say they wanted to amend the training session. But I tried to find other indicators of their state of readiness to train.
I mean, it's really really interesting what you say about, by the time you started coaching them, you have been doing this for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
What mistakes you think you would have made if you had met these boys 30 years before? And let's start there.
Yeah. Well, I've only ever coached 3 athletes under the age of 18, Alistair and Johnny, and the first lad I coached when I was a school teacher. So I do not pretend to have any insight here into I Coach Kids. I think you've got me here on totally false pretenses. But I think the errors I made earlier were that when I had a talented athlete who was starting to do exceptional things like Alistair and Johnny did, in the past, I got a little bit too excited by it as a coach. Instead of taking a long-term view, I might be, well, you've just done really well in that race, which gets you into another race. So let's snatch at that opportunity. Let's grab. I always took really a 4-year view that this was around qualifying for the Olympics, and then and so the horizons were longer when I was 58 in the way I planned than they were when I was a younger coach.
So the main takeaway there is take your time, think long term when you're working with young athletes. Okay,
Yeah.
we use a phrase sometimes that that turning the temperature of the oven up is not gonna bake the cake; it's gonna burn it.
Yeah. Well, but I have to say there was also, in contradiction to that,
Yeah.
and the paradox is that I'd also done a study on endurance athletes, and at the time, the Africans were coming to the fore. And I also had a view on you couldn't spend too long getting to the top. I think the under 23 age group, which many sports have, had done no favors for European endurance athletes. It was a comfort blanket. So to cut a long story short, we did accelerate some of the training, but not the racing.
I knew time was going to fly really quick. I've got one very quick last question before we hand back over to Gary to see if there's any questions from the audience.
Yeah.
But if you take the journey from promising athlete to Olympic champion as a whole, what would you say is your biggest Eureka moment throughout that journey?
The Eureka philosophic point for me really is, looking back on it, is that it's very hard to predict 1 year what athletes are going to achieve in 1 year's time, let alone 4 years' time. And I would make a plea for keeping open inclusivity and not selecting too early, too young in any sport at any time, because children mature at very different rates, psychologically as well as physically and physiologically. And 1 year out, we can't tell who the Olympic team's going to be. So how on earth can we predict what a 15-year-old's going to be like in 2 years' time?
That's a very, very clear message to everybody watching this today. Malcolm, thanks a million from me. I'm going to hand over to Gary because I'm sure there are some questions from the audience.
Malcolm, some amazingly fascinating insights there. Thank you for sharing those with us. And thank you for chatting with Sergio. We have a couple of questions from our audience. First of all, from Peter, who has asked, did you use different motivational strategies for them individually, for Johnny and Ali, that is, or more as a team of brothers?
Yeah, I always felt I was coaching 3 athletes when I was coaching those 2 athletes. There was Alistair, there was Johnny, and then there was a pair, if you see what I mean, that had to be coached as well. And I guess whoever looked after the Serena and Venus may have had similar problems, but I never consulted. So yes, Alistair's the older brother. He has they're very different individuals. So there is very different motivations. You know, one of them needs a lot of confidence building, development in that regard. The other one needs to be made aware that there are threats and hazards on the path, and they can't just ignore them. You know, so yes, they were. Although they're brothers, they were very different emotional, physiological, psychological beings.
And I guess we have time for one more question, and this is a question from Stuart, who is asking, did the boys have an Olympic mindset when they first arrived, or is this something that had to be nurtured and developed over time?
They were very easily persuaded into an Olympic mindset. The sport didn't. the sport in Britain had a mindset of, it doesn't matter how you did in this last race because there's always another one in 14 days' time. You know, I try to inculcate the idea that only do the races that matter and then die trying to win it. And then recover, and then worry about what happens after that. So I had very much a sort of track and field mindset where, you know, there's one big race of the year and there was a qualifier, 2 races perhaps per year. Whereas the general feel in triathlon at the time in the UK was very different from that. But they were very suggestible to that. You know, they fell into that way of thinking, you know, without, they were the 2, I must have coached 100 athletes, and they were the 2 easiest. The others were the difficult ones.
And I'm sure some of them did quite okay as well, did they?
Yeah, they did. They did. But Alistair and John turned up, loved it, did it. Created problems elsewhere, no doubt, but that was fine.
And I think, and one of our pledge items, right, which we're going to talk about in tomorrow, is about developing that love for sport as well as learning the sport. And the fact that they brought that love with them seems so powerful to the stories that you're telling.
Tribute to their parents, their family background, how they brought them up. Also, I think it's really important to say that I fundamentally believe in dual careers, and Alistair's got 2 Olympic gold medals and at the same time 2 academic degrees, university degrees, and Johnny's. And I feel that by doing that, you gave them the comfort of knowing that if it didn't all work out, they could go off into the world of work with a great CV behind them and compete with anybody else who hadn't been a sports person. And I think that psychological security of having qualifications is critical. And I've spent my life trying to persuade people of that. And I think people are coming around to a way of thinking now.
And what a fantastic thing to kind of close on there about creating psychological security for our athletes, and that can be so important at all levels of sport. Malcolm, thank you so much for your time this evening. Your insights are so incredible. We hope that we can catch up again with you soon.
It's been a pleasure. I always learn when I listen to Sergio. Even the questions they've got more than one answer.
Same when I speak to him too. Thanks, Malcolm.